The play on the field, the courts, and the ice is just one part of sports. Behind every game are the people hard at work so we can enjoy the action. They're the owners, administrators, agents, broadcasters, and promoters who bring the games to life. Meet them when you go behind the game with Patrick Klinger and Bill Robertson. Welcome to another edition of Behind the Game. I'm Patrick Klinger, and to my left is a man who really needs no introduction to viewers of the show, but who insists that I do it anyway. The Commissioner of the Western Collegiate Hockey Association, my dear friend, Bill Robertson.
It's good to see you today, Patrick. Today, our special guest is a man who needs no introduction in the world of sports broadcasting. I call him a great friend. I've known him for a long time. He's the current radio voice of the Minnesota Wild, but has had a distinguished career as an outstanding broadcaster in so many levels. Mr. Bob Kurtz, welcome to the show.
Thank you for the nice intro.
Well, we're going to get right into the questions because I know that when we went through these yesterday, Patrick and I, and putting this together, we could sit here for 3 hours and ask you questions about your career. But I guess first and foremost for our audience, you're in your 20th year with the Minnesota Wild as the radio voice of the club. Did you ever think you'd be in this spot at this point?
No, I really didn't. I'm in this spot also, I should say thanks to you, because you hired me out of Boston and brought me back to Minnesota to do the games, and which was a perfect fit at the time, and it's a good fit now. It's just that I really never thought I'd work this long. We were talking in the lobby beforehand. My wife and I sold our house in St. Paul in 2011 in anticipation of retirement. I figured, well, we'll go a couple more years and see how it goes, and I just figured that would be the end of it. But somehow it's 2019, 2020, and I'm still here.
Well, you're considered to be one of the most versatile sportscasters in the game. You've done just about every sport. You've done baseball. You're obviously doing hockey. You've done football. You've done college football. You've done monster trucks. You've done soccer.
I've done dog shows.
Dog shows. Is there any sport in particular that you enjoy doing more than the others?
Well, now it's obviously hockey. You know, you talk about the versatility. That's more in the past. I mean, that's how I made a living, and I enjoyed it at the time. You do this sport, you do that sport, and in each one you do, even the dog show that I was kidding about, you actually get there and you do enough preparation, and you meet somebody who's your color analyst, and they carry you through the broadcast. You actually, you enjoy the sport because you learn something about it. And now the last 20 years, like Bill was mentioning, that I've been with the Wild, I've pretty much been solid hockey, and so hockey would be obviously number one. Twins gave me a chance for a second run a couple of years ago. Baseball is fun as well. And they're two different games, as you know, baseball and hockey.
Two great sports.
Yeah.
The business of broadcasting has changed significantly since you probably broke into the business. What have you seen are the differences and the challenges with today's broadcaster versus when you broke in?
The fundamentals are the same. I mean, you're still, what's the score? How much time is left? Who has the puck, or who's at bat, or who's the that hasn't really changed, particularly in radio. TV obviously has probably changed a lot more. TV, of course, now HD, where we used to have the just the I don't know what was standard picture or whatever it was. I mean, money obviously has changed the game. Money's changed the athletes. Fans have changed. I mean, it used to be you went to a baseball game to see a baseball game. Now it's more of a family night out. So, I mean, it's changed really from one end of the spectrum to the other.
Well, you've broadcast on radio and you broadcast on television. How do you prepare for those? Obviously, the way that you're conveying the action is different if you're on television as opposed to the way that you would do it if you were on radio.
Mm-hmm. Television is both easier and harder than radio. It's easier because you don't have to obviously paint a picture because the camera does that for you. It's harder because you have to work with a lot of different people. Radio, you pretty much, you just do your own thing. I mean, you go in, and that's why most people, especially my age or even close to my age, always prefer radio, because in radio you basically, it's your show, you decide what you want to talk about. TV's a lot of times they lead you and you talk about what they want you to talk about. So you have to answer to a producer. We're not so much in radio.
Many people think that hockey is the hardest and most difficult sport to broadcast because of the pace of the game and the line changes and everything that goes on, plus the enunciation of a lot of foreign players. All those things go into the mix. What is your thoughts on that? Is it a difficult sport to broadcast?
It is when you get in. If you've never done it before, I would think that would probably be the most difficult thing you could possibly try and do, because you've got 6 players starting and one goes here, one goes there. Now you have a line change. Now the defensive core changes. The only thing that generally stays the same is the goaltender. You've got penalties, and you got to figure out how much time is on the clock left in the power play and all that stuff. But once you can do it, and you grow up with it, and I think it's a sport that really helps if you grow up with it. Once you can do that, then it's not as bad, because the game basically plays itself. And like, we'll do the Wild against like the Calgary Flames. They play. You talk. They go to commercial. We all sit back. We relax. We come back. Play. Whereas baseball, especially like, you'll probably get into the Roger Clemens stuff later. When you get a power pitcher like Roger Clemens pitching, sometimes the first inning you're out there 45 minutes and you have all this material written down and you've gone through 80% of it and you're not out of the top half the first inning yet. Whereas in hockey, I can write sometimes 8 things down and you don't get to 7 of them because the game is so quick.
We were talking off air about the grind of being in professional sports and getting on planes at 11 o'clock, midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning, flying to another city, getting ready to do a game again the next day. Like the players and the teams that you cover, you've got a grind ahead of you to be a broadcaster. How do you prepare? How do you stay fresh when you're on the road? And how do you prepare for a game when you're do you have any particular routines that you go through to make sure that
I think the older you get, obviously, whether you're doing baseball or you're just walking to the grocery store, but the older you get, the more routines I think that you follow. Basically, you get your rest. I mean, when you're younger, sometimes you don't do that, but when you're younger, you can get away with it. When you're older, you get your rest. When you have a chance to knock off early for a night, obviously knock off early for a night. I think the hardest thing of the job is travel, which is interesting because anybody who doesn't travel wants to travel. It's like professional golfers. Anybody who's not a professional golfer thinks that they like to play golf 7 days a week. Professional golfers would rather do something else. I love the games. I love broadcasting. The home games are better than the road games because you don't have to travel. And I know it's glamorous if somebody hasn't been to San Francisco or somebody hasn't been to Dallas. But if you've been to Dallas, 75 times, it loses a little bit, along the way. And I always kid the guys who do like the Tampa Bay Lightning or the Florida Panthers. I can't imagine what it's like wrapping up a road trip, flying from Montreal, say, and landing in Palm Beach, and getting off the plane, and it's 2 o'clock in the morning, and it's 62 degrees, and you get in your car and you drive home. Our situation is far different. You realize how bad the weather is in Minneapolis, St. Paul, as far as major cities around the country. You land, it's 2 o'clock in the morning, you are tired, you're getting older, you're tired, and we land out near Signature out at the Minneapolis, St. Paul airport, which is a great facility. The trouble is, plane lands and you don't walk into the airport like a normal passenger. You walk down the stairs, which they roll up to the airplane, then you wait underneath the belly of the plane for your baggage to come down. Now, it could be 27 below zero. It's now 2:30 in the morning. That part of it I could probably do without.
Well, a lot of our audience would say they remember you doing the North Star games, and they remember you doing the Twins games, and then probably your work with Nesson and the Boston Red Sox, and of course with the Wild. But you grew up in Michigan, and you're a proud Michigan native. I know that.
Go State.
And Michigan, both Michigan State and the Detroit Tigers were loves for you as a kid growing up. I mean, I go back to knowing Ernie Harwell's name in Michigan as probably the elite broadcaster of its time. Was that an idol of yours?
Oh, yeah.
And is your style made somewhat about him or not really?
I don't think the style. I think you just grow into your own style. I talk a lot faster. Ernie had that slow Georgia Southern drawl, and which a lot of the old big-time baseball announcers did. I think I talk way too fast to try and so I probably fit hockey better. But I talk way too fast to emulate Ernie. But he was great. I met Ernie as a youngster trying to break into the business, and as he was with everybody, he was very helpful with me. Bruce Martin, when I broke in with the Red Wings, was extremely kind to me. Bud Lynch, they were all boyhood, all boyhood idols, and then you get to work with them. It's unbelievable. I even did a Tiger game one time when George Kell, I was in Boston, but George Kell was not being inducted into the Hall of Fame. He was attending the Hall of Fame ceremonies and wanted the day off, so I did a game from Fenway Park with Al Kaline, who I grew up, when I was 10 years old, Al Kaline was God, So I mean, that part of it's interesting, and you never lose it. I mean, like you could talk about, give me a current player here, like Harmon Killebrew here was a god in Minnesota, and I loved Harmon. Absolutely one of my favorite color people of all time. Harmon and I had a great time, but I only knew Harmon, as a co-worker. I did not grow up in Minnesota, and he was not, right at the top of the mountain. Ours was Al Kaline. So if ever Al Kaline or Bill Freehand, I'm trying to remember some of the names, would walk in, you're like, oh, Gordie Howe,
Yes. A sidebar to that, real quick. Games that you've done with the Wild, doing the Red Wing games, or when you were with the Red Sox or Twins going to the old Tiger Stadium, does that bring some special feelings to you to go back and say, I'm actually doing this in my home state?
Yeah, I mean, but it's any place you've ever been. Even when I did the Twins for a while and then went out and did Boston, when we came back into the Metrodome, it's still, a lot of people in, Minneapolis, St. Paul. So, I mean, it was never just another game. Some nights they turned out into just another game. It would just be a regular baseball game. But, it was always special coming back from where you've been, particularly, I think, when you were a kid. Tiger Stadium was like a cathedral. I mean, it was just a phenomenal ballpark. It had smells like which is hard for a young, what's he talking about, smell? But it had that stale beer, peanut, hot dog, and over the years, the place was there so long that it would sort of, I guess it fermented right into the concrete. Because when you walked into those old ballparks, I mean, it was an unbelievable, you knew you were there.
Distinct
I mean,
aroma.
you could walk in like this and you knew you were at the ballpark.
But one other note to that, the press box at the old Tiger Stadium for baseball was exceptional because you were so close to the action as a radio.
People have always asked, where's the best place if you ever broadcast from? Tiger Stadium, there is no number 2, although there were some awfully good ones among the old buildings. The old buildings were phenomenal. Tiger Stadium, you were probably 65 feet away. I don't think you were 65 feet away. You could hear the catcher talk to the batter. You could hear the umpire. I mean, you were right behind the plate. You could literally have your head taken off, and several did with a foul ball back. A friend of mine, Larry Osterman, left the Twins. I worked with Larry for about 5 years, and then he hooked up at Pass in Detroit, and he was with Bill Freehand one night, and they're doing a Tiger game, and the ball comes back, and you hear a look out, smack, and then he goes, my partner's been hit. That was Freehand, and Osterman was down on the floor. Harwell, who did the Tigers for years, he was smart enough to put not a screen, it's sort of like a netting in front of the radio booth. The TV guys would try this, and the ball, you think you can actually duck, you really can't. It's back, I did one that went right over my shoulder on a foul tip. I mean, it's past you so fast, but it was an unbelievable broadcast location.
I used to sit in the cage behind home plate at the Metrodome with Bob Casey.
I've heard about that.
And
I was never in it.
And it was literally maybe 30, 40 feet away from home plate. And foul balls would come screaming back. Bob's pop would fly in the air. He'd swear. I'd be covered with his whatever he was drinking at the moment. So I know that feeling.
You just don't get that anymore. I mean, now,
You
of
don't.
course, everything is how much money can we sell for what a great location. If it's that good a location, we'll sell for it. And we keep getting moved. That's been the hardest thing in hockey, is ever since I came back in. You keep getting moved. When I broke in in the 70s, late 70s with the Detroit Red Wings and at the old Olympia. And the old Olympia and the Chicago Stadium and Maple Leaf Gardens and the Forum in Montreal all had phenomenal broadcasting booths. But they were the old style. They had great seating for the fans. If you went in and you had a balcony seat, like at Olympia, you had front row and you were looking like right down on top of it. But the trouble is that the old style of building went straight up in the air, and so you had these steel girders. And so there were a lot of obstructed seats in the building. So as they started to build the new ones 20 years later, the girders came out, But to do that, you've got to, I'm not an architect by any stretch, you've got to start going like this. Well, the problem with going like this is, guess where we are? We're here, and we just keep going, and it's not the height. The height doesn't bother you, it's the depth. The further and further and further and further away you get, you're a long way from those far boards. And there's some buildings now that are just almost, like Edmonton's the newest I've worked in, are almost impossible to work in. It's just completely lousy. You talk to any National League and NHL broadcaster, say, what are the 5 worst places in the league? And almost all of them will go, Edmonton, Pittsburgh, Dallas, they're well known, New Jersey. There's another one in there someplace that escapes me for the moment.
Bob, to that point, how much of the game do you call by literally looking at the action on the ice, and how much of it are you looking at the television? Because
in hockey, it's 100% on the eyes. Baseball is different because you got to be able to see the pitch, and even when you do radio in baseball, you've got a television monitor in front of you, which shows from the center field camera, so you can see whether it's a breaking ball or where the pitch winds up. But hockey, it's 100% with the eyes. There are some guys who will sit, I can tell so-and-so by his skating thing. I couldn't tell. There are some arenas I couldn't tell Bugard from Bouchard. And one was 6'7", and the other one was like 5'9". So, it's basically number. In the old days, again, going back, when I broke in, most of them weren't wearing helmets. The goaltenders, surprisingly didn't even wear a mask. And somebody had red hair, he had red hair. Somebody's bald, he's bald. You can see that. But those days are long gone since they put the helmet on and everything else. So well, back and back and back you go.
Understand. It has changed quite drastically. You have called some very famous, in particular, baseball games, plus the Wild's first ever playoff run. I was in Anaheim, fortunate to be working when Rod Carew had his 3,000th hit, and you were calling the game for the Twins. Is there anything special you remember about that, or maybe Roger Clemens' 20th strikeout game at Fenway Park with the Red Sox? How you commemorate those type of calls, or as they're going on, you're thinking, how am I going to do this? Or does it just come natural to you and say, I'm just going to call it like I regularly would?
Just come call it the way it is. I know some people, right, I think that's a bad thing to do. It may work for somebody. I've never really thought about it. But Carew's thing, the biggest thing I remember about Carew's thing was Harmon Killebrew breaking down in tears, because Harmon was a longtime teammate of Rod Carew's, and I was fine, but Harmon sort of wobbled through it. But that's what made it so special. Baseball, you get a lot of that. The historic stuff. I was talking with Patrick before the game. I had Chris Bosio's no-hitter. I don't think I'm probably the only person in America that still remembers it. It was at the old Kingdome in Seattle, and it was against the Red Sox, and there probably was 4,000 people there. I had Andre Dawson's 400th home run, a 20 strikeout game by Roger Clemens. Hockey-wise, it was Ginla's 500th goal, which was it was like Harmon's 500th home run. It was a long time in coming. And what was the other one? Oh, Gabrick. Then Gabrick scored, 5 goals. But see, you don't get that much in hockey. You get, very few numerical milestones. Baseball, you get a lot of the individual stuff. You don't remember the game so much as like I had Garcia Parra one night for Boston, had 3 homers and 10 RBIs in a game. So those are the things. I couldn't tell you the final score, and I think it was against Seattle. But that's how you have to go back and try and piece it together.
So, Bob, in situations like that, when something historic is taking place, do you find yourself getting caught up in the excitement of what's going on?
What's funny? I hate to burst anybody's bubble. I haven't done that many historic, because what happens in our industry now, and I spent a lot of years in TV, the networks have all the big games. So like when the hockey season ends, the networks basically take over. So and most of the stuff happens, in the playoffs. So it's you and you also have so many teams now that how many historic games are you going to play? Unless your team wins the Stanley Cup every year, like I'd imagine Pat Foley. If you had Pat Foley here from Chicago Blackhawks, 3 Stanley Cups in 5 years, I'm sure there were, he could run through a lot of those with you. But you just generally, we had it with the Wild, like Bill was mentioning in 2003, fabulous. We had, Andrew Burnett's, anytime you have a Game 7, especially when you have a Game 7 with overtime, and we've had a couple of those with the Wild. We had the Brunette one in Colorado, and then we also had the one with Nino Niederreiter, which is also in Colorado, a number of years later. Game 7s are fun.
Yes.
Those would be my historic moments, would be with the Wild in Game 7. Another one I had, Game 7, which is one of maybe my most memorable broadcast. It might have been because of where I was brought up, but the Minnesota North Stars had a playoff run, I think it was in 1980, and they were going against the Montreal Canadiens, which at the time the Canadiens had won 4 consecutive Stanley Cups, and the Wild went into the Forum and won Game 1 and 2. Then the Canadiens came back and won Game 3 and 4 in Minnesota, Game 5 in Montreal. Now the Wild trail in Game 6 at home. They have a big rally. Glenn Sonmore has, he comes out and the roof goes off the building, and the Wild force a 7th game in Montreal. Well, I grew up with 6 teams in the National Hockey League. We used to have Hockey Night in Canada when I lived as a kid in Detroit. I mean, so you go into the Montreal Forum, no one is going to win Game 7 in the Forum in Montreal other than the Montreal Canadiens. So the game goes on and back. I mean, you know you're going to lose. I mean, you just know you're going to lose. So now it's 2-2 late in the game. So I'm figuring, all right, now who's going to score for Montreal? Give them 5 straight. Well, lo and behold, Al McAdams scores for the North Stars. I think it was like 2:32 to go in the game. The Wild win. They beat the Canadiens. And the Canadiens had Doug Riseborough. They had won 4 straight Stanley Cups. And the Wild knocked them out. So, I mean, it was unbelievable. Building was, you grew up watching games from the Forum was like the Vatican. I mean, it was like the Sistine Chapel. No one wins in there if it's not supposed to, So.
How about for you, the different broadcasters who you've been associated with, and when you go on the road or at home? Do you
have Tom Reed?
Well, you have Tom Reed would be one, Larry Osterman would be another, Harmon Killebrew.
There's been a few.
But I mean, not only your partners, but other broadcast crews having dinner, lunch, talking about the games. Do you do a lot of that, or is that something that you really like to just focus on the game itself?
I don't think you're focusing on the game itself so much. I think you just get older. You have other things. You have family responsibility. When I was younger, a lot of times we went out with the other broadcasters. Now with the older broadcasters, we're very friendly. I mean, we've known each other for years, but rarely do you necessarily go out with them. They have their own thing to do before the game. But we used to have a deal when I was first. You talk about differences in sports. When I was just broke in, which is like 1969, I was like 22 years old, doing Michigan State football. I mean, I wasn't doing the actual game, but you were part of the support crew, and we would go on the road. They used to have a thing called a Big Ten smoker the night before the game. So if you were playing, for example, Notre Dame, Michigan State was playing Notre Dame, the night before the football game, as hard as this is to believe now, the 2 head coaches, the 2 athletic directors, the staff were together, and the whole school put it on. The coaches were laughing. They were having a drink here and there. I remember Duffy Doherty one time says, "I'll start the game tomorrow against you with an onside kick," which he did. Now, I mean, then late 60s, that's when Bo Schembechler and that ilk came in, and that was the end of the Friday Night Smokers. I mean, those coaches refused to do it. Him and Woody Hayes, and as they went on from there. But there was a time that everybody socialized before the game. All the broadcasters, all the writers from both, like if it's here in Minnesota, all the Minnesota people and all the visiting Michigan State people would get together and they'd put on a nice show.
I bet you could write a book on some of those stories.
Oh, it's some interesting things there.
Bob, you're a broadcaster for the Minnesota Wild, so ostensibly those who are listening are Wild fans. How do you balance being a homer, if you will, understanding who's listening to you, versus trying to be an objective broadcaster and just simply calling what you're seeing taking place on the ice?
I think we pretty much call it down the middle. I mean, you got to give credit to the other team. I mean, you do, as far as information goes, you realize that I wouldn't call you it homer, but that people are more interested in like hearing about Wild players than they are hearing about like Avalanche players. You feature some of the Avalanche players, but you don't beat the news from Colorado to death. So,
how about a favorite character for you, or favorite characters, whether they're broadcasters or players?
Larry Osterman was not only a character, he was a very good friend, still is a very good friend. One of the first I worked with in baseball, and of course, one of the biggest characters, of course, runs Tom Reed's Hockey City Pub right down the street. I got the plug in, right down the street from the arena. I mean, Tom and I did our first game together in 1980 at the old McNichols Arena in Denver. It was the Colorado Rockies, who used to be the Kansas City Scouts, who are now the New Jersey Devils. So there'll be a quiz on that. And Kerry Frazier was making his NHL debut as the referee. So that's how long ago that was.
Well, you have great karma with Tom, and I'm happy that both of you are working together on radio for KFAN and the Wild Radio Network. I think you're a great team, even though you maybe not see each other every day in the off season. When you come back, it's like you
pick it up right where it left off.
Yes, which is great.
Yeah.
Jack Buck will always be remembered in this market for his call following Kirby Puckett's
See you
Game
tomorrow,
6
right?
home run. We'll see you tomorrow night.
That's right.
And of course, Al Michaels, he had Do You Believe in Miracles with the 1980 U.S.
Yes.
men's gold medal Olympic
I forget who it was that said that once, I don't know, it was Bob Costas or who recently said, once that Al Michaels said, "Do you believe in miracles?" You can't possibly top that. Everybody else just ought to just give it up.
Yeah.
So don't even bother to try to do that.
It's probably some truth
know?
to that. Do you have a particular call?
No,
in
not
a
really.
game?
I mean, I've tried to, I can't even remember what they are now. You try and a few phrases along the years, and I just finally gave up. But you just go and do what you just go and do, and what you see is what it is.
Well, we're down to about under 2 minutes of this show. It's gone by, as we said.
You've endured that much already.
It's gone by very fast. A couple of quick things. I want to know for the audience out there that you're doing the Wild games now. Number one, how do you think the Wild are going to do this year, in your opinion, in the tough Western Conference? And then two, what do you do with your spare time?
Number one, well, if they're not very good, then I have a lot of spare time come spring. But and I'll get to that in a second. I think they'll be better than people think they will be this year. I don't whether they'll make the playoffs or not. I don't know, but they'll have a shot at it. I think it'll go right down to the end. I don't know what's coming up in the future because it's an aging team, and you do have some changes that they have to make. But I mean, as far as this year goes, they got some talent. And it depends on how Parisi and how, not Parisi, it always depends on Parisi, but Koivu was the one I was trying to say. Koivu and Dumba come back from their injuries, and it always depends on how the big guy, Dumba, or not the big guy, Dumba, the big guy, Dubnyk, does in goal for him.
And goaltending is an important piece, but I
But
think
as far as his free time goes, I was at the Wild Media Day the other day, and Tom and I ran into Ryan Suter. We were saying, boy, it was really the summer went too fast, and Suter was saying it was 5 months long. So.
Hey, Bob, it's been a pleasure, a privilege to have you on.
It's fun to
Behind
be
the
here.
Game.
We could go on and on. Too bad we don't have an hour show.
I wish that were the case. And thank you for watching Behind the Game. We'll see you again next month.